The ground shook, shattering my apartment and my life. Seeking safety, I went to my father's estate, only to hear 5 heartless words. "He can't stay here." I left with my son, found a hidden box at a friend's, and unearthed a secret that would cost my father everything. This story proves that family isn't always blood, and justice has a funny way of showing up when you least expect it. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the ending. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The sound wasn't a rumble. It was a roar, like a freight train barreling directly through the center of my living room. At 3:14 a.m., the world didn't just wake up, it broke apart. 1 second, I was deep in a dreamless sleep, the kind only a single mother working double shifts as a pediatric nurse can achieve. The next, my bed was sliding across the hardwood floor, slamming violently against the radiator. "Mommy." The scream sliced through the cacophony of breaking glass and groaning metal. It was Leo. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I launched myself out of bed, the floor pitching and rolling beneath my feet like the deck of a ship in a hurricane. The hallway was a gauntlet of falling debris. A framed picture of a beach sunset, one I'd bought at a thrift store to brighten up our rental, shattered inches from my bare toes. The drywall cracked with a sound like a gunshot, sending a plume of white dust into the air that tasted like chalk and old fear. "Leah." "I'm coming, get under the bed." I screamed, my voice raw, fighting to be heard over the deafening groan of the building's structural beams twisting. I threw open his door. His room was chaos. The bookshelf had toppled, spilling bright picture books and plastic dinosaurs across the floor, blocking my path. In the corner, huddled beneath his duvet with his knees pulled to his chest, was my 5-year-old son. His eyes were wide, dark pools of absolute terror. I scrambled over the fallen shelf, ignoring the sharp bite of a plastic stegosaurus digging into my knee. I grabbed him, pulling his small, trembling body against mine, and rolled us both under the sturdy oak desk we had found at a yard sale just last month. We lay there, tangled together in the dark, while the apartment screamed around us. I covered his ears with my hands and buried my face in his hair, whispering over and over, "It's okay, I've got you, it's going to stop, I've got you." But it felt like it would never stop. The shaking went on for what felt like hours, though it was likely less than a minute. Every rattle of the windows felt like a threat. Every creak of the ceiling made me squeeze my eyes shut, praying that the 3 stories above us wouldn't come crashing down. When silence finally returned, it was heavy and suffocating. The air was thick with dust. Car alarms blared from the street below, a dissonant chorus of panic. "Mommy." Leo whispered, his voice trembling so hard it vibrated against my chest. "Is the house broken?" I choked back a sob, smoothing his hair down. "We're safe, baby. That's all that matters, we're safe." We crawled out from under the desk. The moonlight filtering through the window revealed the devastation. Massive cracks ran up the walls like spiderwebs. The ceiling in the kitchen had partially collapsed. The smell of gas began to drift in, faint but unmistakable. "We have to go," I said, urgency seizing my limbs. "Now, Leo, shoes, grab your blanket." We evacuated into the cool night air, joining the hundreds of other dazed, pajama-clad residents standing in the street. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Firefighters were already shouting orders, cordoning off our building. A heavy-set man in a yellow turnout coat walked down the line of shivering tenants. He stopped in front of me, looking at the building behind us. "You in 3B?" he asked, glancing at his clipboard. "Yes," I said, shivering, wrapping my coat tighter around Leo. He shook his head grimly. "Structural damage looks severe on that side. The foundation shifted. You won't be going back in there tonight, ma'am. Maybe not ever. It's condemned until further notice." I looked down at Leo. He was clutching his stuffed bear, his knuckles white. Everything we owned, our clothes, our memories, the little life I had scraped together for us, was behind that yellow tape, likely ruined or inaccessible for weeks. I had $74 in my bank account until payday on Friday. I had no renter's insurance. It was a luxury I had cut to pay for Leo's speech therapy. We were homeless. I pulled out my phone, the screen cracked but functional. My thumb hovered over the contact list. There was only one person with the space and the resources to help us in a crisis like this. A person I hadn't spoken to in 6 months and hadn't visited in 2 years. My father, Andrew. I looked at Leo's scared face, dirt smudged on his cheek. I swallowed my pride. I swallowed the bitterness that had sat in my throat for years. "It's okay, Leo," I said, my voice shaking with a fear that had nothing to do with the earthquake. "We're going to Grandpa's house." I didn't know it then, but the betrayal waiting for us behind those iron gates would be worse than the disaster we had just survived. The drive to the outskirts of the city was surreal. We passed overturned trash cans, shattered storefront windows, and people huddled on corners. But as we drove further north, climbing the winding hills toward the wealthy district of Highcrest, the destruction faded. Here, the roads were smooth. The trees were standing tall. The earthquake seemed to have respected the property lines of the rich. My car, a 10-year-old sedan that rattled when it idled, felt pitifully out of place as I pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the manor. That's what my father, Andrew, called it. Not home. The manor. I punched the code into the keypad. It hadn't changed. The gates swung open with a smooth, silent glide, welcoming us into a world that felt light years away from the dusty chaos of my apartment block. The driveway was lined with manicured hedges, illuminated by soft, recessed lighting. The house itself, a sprawling, modern architectural marvel of glass and stone, glowed warmly against the night sky. My father was an architect, a brilliant, cold, and incredibly wealthy one. He had designed this house to be his masterpiece. It was a museum, not a home. I parked the car. My hands were shaking so badly I struggled to unbuckle Leo. "Is this Grandpa's castle?" Leo asked, his eyes wide. He had only been here once when he was a baby. Andrew rarely invited us, and he never visited our cramped little box, as he called my apartment. "Yes, baby," I said, taking a deep breath. "Remember, we have to be very careful inside. No running, okay?" I rang the doorbell. A minute later, the heavy oak door swung open. It wasn't a servant who answered, but Julia, my father's wife. She was 45, only 13 years older than me, with skin that looked like it had been airbrushed and a wardrobe that cost more than my annual salary. She was wearing a silk robe that shimmered in the porch light. "Adeline," she said, blinking. She didn't step back to let us in. She just stood there, blocking the entrance. "It's 4 in the morning." "There was an earthquake, Julia," I said, my voice tight. "My building is condemned. We have nowhere to go." Her eyes flicked down to Leo, who was hiding behind my leg, clutching his dirty teddy bear. Her lip curled slightly, a micro-expression of distaste she quickly smoothed over. "Oh, right, the tremor." We barely felt it here, just a few rattled glasses. She sighed, a sound that implied my tragedy was a significant inconvenience to her sleep schedule. "Well, come in, I suppose. Andrew is in the study. He's checking the structural integrity of his other properties." We stepped into the foyer. It was breathtakingly cold. The floors were polished marble, the walls adorned with abstract art. It smelled of expensive candles and sterility. "Andrew," Julia called out, her voice echoing. "Adeline is here. She says she's homeless." My father emerged from the hallway to the left. He was a tall man, imposing, with silver hair and steel-rimmed glasses. He was dressed in pressed slacks and a dress shirt, despite the hour. He looked at me, then at Leo, then back at me. There was no hug. "No, are you okay? No concern. I saw the news," Andrew said, his voice flat. "The downtown district took a hit. Poor construction standards in those older buildings. I always said they were death traps." "We're fine, thank you for asking," I said, the sarcasm slipping out before I could stop it. I took a breath. "Dad, the police condemned the building. We can't go back. I just need a place for a few days until I can figure out insurance and temporary housing. Just a few days." Andrew looked at Julia. They exchanged a look, a silent conversation that made my stomach turn. It was a look of shared annoyance, of boundaries being crossed. "Adeline," Andrew said, turning back to me. He clasped his hands behind his back. "You know how delicate the environment is here. Julia has just finished the renovations in the East Wing. The art collection is exposed." "He's 5, Dad," I said, stepping closer, instinctively shielding Leo. He's not a wild animal, he's your grandson. He's a child, Andrew corrected, as if that were a diagnosis. And from what I recall of your parenting style, he is spirited. He's traumatized. I snapped, my voice rising. The ceiling almost fell on us, we just need a bed. Andrew sighed, taking off his glasses and cleaning them with a silk handkerchief. You can stay, Adeline, of course. You are my daughter. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Thank you, I promise we won't be. But, he interrupted, holding up a hand. He put his glasses back on and looked directly at Leo, his gaze cold and unyielding. The boy cannot. The silence that followed was louder than the earthquake. Excuse me, I whispered. We cannot have a child running rampant here right now, Julia chimed in, stepping next to Andrew. Her voice was sickly sweet like poisoned honey. We have the gala next week. The house is being prepped. Caterers, decorators, it's simply not safe for him. And frankly, Adeline, Andrew needs his rest. He can't have a screaming child waking him up. He's 5, I repeated, my voice trembling with rage. Where do you expect him to go? A shelter, by himself. Surely his father can take him. Andrew suggested dismissively. You know his father has been out of the picture since before he was born, I spat. You know that. Well, that was your choice, wasn't it? Andrew said coldly. Choices have consequences, Adeline. You wanted to live your independent life. You wanted to marry that man against my advice. Now you want me to clean up the mess. He looked at Leo again. You can stay in the guest suite. The boy, perhaps there is a boarding facility or a friend. He stays with me, I said, my voice hardening into steel. We are a package deal. Then I'm afraid you cannot stay, Andrew said. He didn't even blink. I have my rules, Adeline, my house, my rules. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had raised me. I looked at the marble floors and the expensive paintings. I realized then that this wasn't about the art. It wasn't about the gala. It was about punishment. He was punishing me for not being the daughter he wanted, the one who married a rich man, joined the country club, and let him control her life. I gripped Leo's hand so tight he winced. Fine, I said. We're leaving. Be reasonable, Adeline, Julia said, checking her manicure. Don't be dramatic, just find somewhere for the boy and come back. You look terrible. You need sleep. I would rather sleep in my car, I said, turning toward the door. I paused with my hand on the heavy brass handle. I looked back at them, the king and queen of their empty marble castle. You think you own everything, don't you? I said, my voice low. A strange memory surfaced in my mind, something my mother had whispered to me years ago when she was sick, right before the end. Andrew forgets who the land belonged to. I think you're forgetting something, Dad, I said. Mom always said you loved this house more than you loved us, but she also said that people who build on stolen ground shouldn't throw stones. Andrew's eyes narrowed. What is that supposed to mean? It means, I said, opening the door to the cold night, that you might have the keys, but you don't have the soul. Goodbye. I slammed the door. As we walked back to my beat-up car, I was shaking, not from cold, but from fury. But deep down, a seed had been planted. What did Mom mean about the land? The car wouldn't start at first. It coughed and sputtered, mirroring my own exhaustion. When the engine finally turned over, I let out a sob I had been holding in for an hour. Leo was asleep in the back seat before we even reached the main road. His resilience amazed me, but it also broke my heart. He shouldn't have to be resilient. He should have a grandfather who offered him hot cocoa, not an eviction notice. I drove aimlessly for 20 minutes, my mind racing. I had no money for a hotel. The shelters would be overflowing. Then I remembered Sarah. Sarah was more than a best friend. She was my sister in every way that mattered. We had grown up together. Her mother, Martha, and my mother, Eleanor, had been inseparable until my mother passed away from cancer 10 years ago. Martha had died just last year, leaving Sarah alone in their old, rambling Victorian house on the other side of town. I pulled over and dialed her number. It was 4:45 a.m. Hello. Her voice was groggy, thick with sleep. Sarah, it's Adeline. I'm so sorry to call. Addie, the sleep vanished instantly. I saw the news. Are you okay? Where are you? I'm in the car with Leo. The apartment is gone. My dad, he wouldn't let us stay. He what? Sarah's voice rose an octave. Get here, now, the key is under the flower pot, just come straight in. 30 minutes later, Leo was tucked into a warm bed in Sarah's guest room, and I was sitting at Sarah's kitchen table, clutching a steaming mug of tea. Sarah sat opposite me, her face pale with anger as I recounted the conversation at the manor. That monster, Sarah hissed. He actually said Leo couldn't stay, because of a gala. He said he was disruptive, I said, wiping a tear. But it wasn't that, it was cold, calculated. It was Julia, too. She looked at Leo like he was a stain on the carpet. Sarah shook her head. Andrew has always been obsessed with appearance, but this is a new low. Ever since he married Julia, he's erased everything your mom stood for. He turned that house into a mausoleum. I know, I said. Whatever, I don't need him. I just need to figure out what to do next. You stay here, Sarah said firmly. As long as you need. This house is too big for me anyway since Mom died. It gets lonely. She stood up. Actually, speaking of your mom, this is weird timing, but maybe it's a sign. She walked out of the kitchen, and I heard her footsteps creaking up the stairs to the attic. I sat there, the warmth of the tea seeping into my frozen hands. I thought about my mother, Alina. She had been the opposite of Andrew, warm, chaotic, artistic. She had inherited the land the manor was built on from her grandfather. Andrew had been the architect who convinced her to build the modern monstrosity on it, claiming it would be their legacy. But as soon as it was built, she seemed to shrink inside it. Sarah came back down carrying a heavy, dust-covered wooden box. It was sealed with old, yellowing tape. What is that? I asked. My mom kept this in the back of her closet, Sarah said, placing it on the table with a heavy thud. She told me about it a few weeks before she passed. She said your mom gave it to her about a month before she died. Alina made Martha promise to keep it safe, and to only give it to you if you were in trouble with Andrew. A chill went down my spine. In trouble with Andrew. That's what she said. I totally forgot about it until you called tonight. I guess being homeless and rejected by him counts as trouble. I stared at the box. It was an old wine crate nailed shut. Do you have a hammer? I asked. Sarah handed me a tool from the kitchen drawer. I pried the lid open. The nails screeched in protest, a harsh sound in the quiet kitchen. Inside, there was no money, no jewelry, just stacks of papers, some bound in legal folders, others loose and handwritten. And right on top, a USB drive taped to a blue envelope with my name on it in my mother's looping handwriting. I opened the envelope first. My dearest Adeline, if you are reading this, I have failed to protect you while I was alive. I am writing this because I fear Andrew. I fear his ambition has outgrown his morality. He thinks I am weak, that the chemo has made me foggy, but I see what he is doing. He is trying to push you out of the will. He is trying to make sure everything goes to him. He forgets that the land is mine, the trust is mine, and the house. The house belongs to the bloodline, not the builder. Inside this box is the truth. I didn't want to use it. I loved him once. But if he has turned on you, you must use it. Destroy him, Adeline, for Leo, for us. Love, Mom. My hands were trembling so hard the paper rattled. What does it say? Sarah whispered. I looked up at her, my vision blurring. It says my father has been lying for 10 years. I reached into the box and pulled out a thick legal document. It was titled the Alina V. Estate Trust, Amended Final Will and Testament. I scanned the pages. The legalese was dense, but one clause stood out, highlighted in yellow by my mother's hand. Upon my death, the entirety of the Highcrest estate, including the land and all structures thereon, shall pass immediately into the sole ownership of my daughter, Adeline. Andrew Robert V. is granted right of habitation only so long as he remains unmarried. Upon remarriage, his right to the property is revoked immediately. I gasped. Oh my God. What? Sarah asked, leaning in. Sarah, I looked at her, my heart pounding against my ribs like a hammer. My dad married Julia 4 years ago. Yeah. According to this, the moment he said, I do to Julia, he lost the house. He doesn't own the manor, he doesn't own the land. I looked back at the paper. I do. The discovery in Sarah's kitchen wasn't just a revelation, it was a detonation. The sun was just beginning to bleed through the blinds, casting long, pale stripes across the scatter of documents on the table. Leo was still asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware that his mother had just unearthed the weapon that could dismantle his grandfather's empire. "He's been living in my house," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "For 4 years, with her." Sarah picked up a document, her eyes scanning the dense legal text. "And he kicked you out. He kicked his own grandson out of a house that legally belongs to you." The audacity of it was breathtaking. My father, the meticulous architect, the man who preached about structure and foundation, had built his entire life on a lie. He had let me struggle. He had watched me work double shifts, skip meals to pay for Leo's speech therapy, and live in a crumbling apartment, all while he sat in my library, drinking my mother's wine, with a woman who treated me like the help. "I need a lawyer," I said, my voice hardening. "A real one. Not one of his country club buddies." "I know someone," Sarah said immediately. "Remember Mark, from high school? He's a partner at a firm downtown now, specializes in estate law. He hates your dad." "Why?" "Because your dad tried to ruin his dad's construction business back in the day. Petty stuff, but Mark remembers." 2 hours later, after a quick shower and a change into some of Sarah's clothes that were a size too big, I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room. Mark, looking older but still possessing the same sharp, observant eyes I remembered, was flipping through the documents from the box. He stopped at a particular page, adjusted his glasses, and let out a low whistle. "This is explosive, Adeline," he said, looking up. "This is the original, signed, and notarized amendment to your mother's will. The one filed with the county clerk, the one your father probated, it doesn't have this clause." "So he forged it?" I asked, my stomach twisting. "He either forged a new will or he suppressed this amendment," Mark said, tapping the paper. "But look here, this date. This was signed 3 weeks before she died. Your father's version is dated 6 months prior." He pulled out a laptop and started typing furiously. "If this holds up and it looks authentic, your father committed fraud, massive fraud, and since he remarried Julia, he's been trespassing for 4 years. Every penny he's spent from the estate account since then. Theft." I thought of the gala, the renovations, the art, all stolen from me, all stolen from Leo. "Can we prove he knew?" I asked. "He could say he never saw this amendment." Mark pointed to the bottom of the last page. "See this witness signature. Martha S." "Sarah's mom," I breathed. "Exactly. And if Martha kept this box for you, it means she knew. Your father probably thought he had destroyed all copies. But your mother was smarter than him." Mark leaned back, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "Adeline, we don't just have a case. We have a nuclear bomb. We can file an emergency injunction to freeze the assets and contest the probate. But if you want to really hurt him, if you want him to feel it, we need to be strategic." "He hurt my son," I said, the memory of Leo shivering under the desk flashing in my mind. "I don't want to just hurt him, I want to evict him." "Then let's serve him," Mark said. "But let's do it publicly, where it will embarrass him the most." "The gala," I said, "next Saturday." Mark nodded. "Perfect. I'll draft the paperwork. But we need one more thing. We need to know where the original copy of this amendment was filed. Your mother wouldn't have just left it in a box. She would have had a backup." I thought back to the letter, "The land is mine." "The USB drive," I said, remembering the small silver stick taped to the envelope. "I haven't checked it yet." We plugged it into Mark's laptop. It contained a single video file. I clicked play. The screen filled with my mother's face. She looked tired, her skin pale from the chemo, but her eyes were clear and fierce. She was sitting in the very library my father now claimed as his own. "If you're watching this," she began, her voice raspy but strong, "it means Andrew has betrayed my trust. I am recording this on June 14th, 2015. I am signing the amendment to my will now." She held up the document, the same one sitting on the table in front of us. She turned the camera to show Martha standing beside her. "I, Martha S., witness this signature," Martha said, her voice wavering slightly. And I attest that a leaner is of sound mind and body. My mother looked back at the camera. Andrew thinks I don't know about his accounts in the Caymans. He thinks I don't know he's already planning the renovations for when I'm gone. But this house is for Adeline. It always has been. If he tries to take it, use this video. The video ended. The room was silent. Mark closed the laptop gently. That's it. That's the nail in the coffin. Adeline, we're going to destroy him. The week leading up to the gala was a blur of covert preparation. I stayed at Sarah's, keeping Leo close, telling him we were on a vacation with Auntie Sarah. Every time my phone rang, I jumped, half expecting it to be my father, somehow knowing what we were planning. But the phone remained silent. He didn't call to check on us. He didn't care if we had found shelter. He had washed his hands of us. Saturday arrived with a cold, clear sky. I dressed in a simple black dress I had bought at a consignment shop. It wasn't gala attire, but it was dignified. It was mourning clothes for the father I used to have. Mark met me outside the manor gates. He had a process server with him, a burly man named Dave who looked like he could handle a linebacker. "Ready?" Mark asked. "More than anything," I said. We showed our invitations. Mark had acquired them from a client to the security guard. He frowned at my dress but waved us through. The driveway was lined with luxury cars, Ferraris, Bentleys, Rolls-Royces. The house was lit up like a beacon, music spilling out onto the lawn. Inside, the foyer was crowded with the city's elite. Waiters circulated with champagne flutes. A string quartet played in the corner. And there, in the center of the room, holding court, was Andrew. Julia was on his arm, dripping in diamonds that I now knew were likely bought with my inheritance. They were laughing at something a senator was saying. Andrew looked powerful, untouchable, the master of his domain. I took a deep breath and walked straight toward him. Mark and Dave flanked me. The crowd parted as we approached. The energy in the room shifted. People sensed the tension. The music seemed to fade. "Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter. Andrew turned. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then reassembled into a mask of polite confusion. "Adeline," he said, loud enough for the people around him to hear. "I didn't expect you. I thought you were handling your situation." "My situation is handled," I said, stopping a few feet from him. "I'm staying at Sarah's. You remember Sarah, don't you? Martha's daughter." Julia stepped forward, her nose wrinkling. "Adeline, this is hardly the time. We are entertaining. If you need money for a hotel, just ask Andrew later. Don't make a scene." "I don't need money," I said, holding her gaze. "And I'm not here for a hotel, I'm here for my house." A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. Andrew laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. "You're tired, Adeline, you're talking nonsense. This stress has clearly affected you." He motioned to a security guard. "Please escort my daughter to the kitchen. Get her some water." "No," I said, planting my feet. "I'm not going to the kitchen. I'm going to the library, because that's where Mom signed the will you hid." Andrew's face went rigid. The color drained from his cheeks. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," I said. "I found the box, Dad, Mom's box, the one Martha kept." "That's enough," Andrew snapped, his voice losing its polished veneer. "Get out of my house, now." "It's not your house," I said, raising my voice so it carried to the back of the room. "It hasn't been your house since the day you married Julia." I nodded to Dave. The process server stepped forward and thrust a thick envelope into Andrew's chest. "Andrew V., you are hereby served with an eviction notice and a lawsuit for fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty." The envelope hit the floor with a heavy slap. The room went dead silent. Even the string quartet stopped playing. Andrew stared at the envelope, then at me. His eyes were full of a cold, terrifying rage. "You ungrateful little brat," he hissed, low enough that only I could hear. "You think a piece of paper can touch me? I built this. I am this house." "You're a tenant," I said calmly, "and your lease is up." "Security," Andrew roared, pointing at me. "Get them out, they are trespassing." Two large guards moved toward us. Mark stepped in front of me, holding up a hand. "If you touch her," Mark announced clearly, "you will be assaulting the legal owner of this property. We have a temporary restraining order signed by a judge an hour ago, granting Adeline immediate possession of the estate pending the hearing on Monday. If anyone is trespassing, Mr. V, it's you. Andrew looked at the guards. They hesitated, looking between him and the official-looking papers in Mark's hand. This is ridiculous. Julia shrieked, her composure shattering. Andrew, do something, tell them. It's a forgery, Andrew shouted, desperate now, addressing the crowd. She's unstable. She forged these documents. She's trying to steal my home. We'll see who stole what in court, I said. Enjoy the party, Dad. It's your last one here. I turned and walked out, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Behind me, the murmurs of the crowd exploded into chaos. I didn't look back. I had lit the fuse. Now I just had to watch it burn. The weekend was a firestorm. The confrontation at the gala had made the local news, then the national gossip columns. Architect to the stars evicted by daughter in stunning gala showdown. The headline was satisfying, but the battle was far from over. We were staying at a secure hotel suite Mark had arranged, fearing retaliation. My phone was blowing up with messages from family friends who had ignored me for years, suddenly eager to get the scoop. I ignored them all. Monday morning, we were in court. The emergency hearing was to determine the validity of the will and the eviction notice. Andrew arrived with a team of 5 lawyers. He looked tired, his eyes rimmed with red, but he was dressed in an impeccable suit, projecting an image of wronged authority. Julia was absent. His lead attorney, a shark named Sterling, started aggressively. "Your Honor," Sterling boomed, pacing the courtroom. "This is a tragic case of a daughter exploiting a clerical error and forging documents to extort her grieving father. The document in question is a blatant fabrication. The signature is clearly traced. We have experts ready to testify." They were going with the forgery defense. It was their only card. If they could prove the amendment was fake, the original will, the one leaving everything to Andrew, would stand. Furthermore, Sterling continued, Mr. V has invested millions into the improvement of the estate. To evict him based on this dubious paper would be a miscarriage of justice. I sat next to Mark, my hands clenched in my lap. They were good. They were spinning a narrative that made me look like a greedy, estranged daughter capitalizing on a tragedy. "Your Honor," Mark said, standing up. "We are not relying solely on the document. We have corroborating evidence." "What evidence?" the judge asked, peering over her glasses. "A video deposition," Mark said, "recorded by the deceased, Alina V., on the day the amendment was signed." Andrew's head snapped up. This was the one thing he hadn't anticipated. He knew about the paper. He had likely spent years wondering if a copy existed, but a video, that was new. Mark submitted the USB drive into evidence. The judge allowed it to be played. The courtroom watched in silence as my mother's face filled the monitors. Her voice, weak but resolute, echoed off the wood-paneled walls. "Andrew thinks I don't know. This house is for Adeline. The bloodline, not the builder." When the video ended, the silence was heavy. I looked at Andrew. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was staring at his hands, his face pale, his jaw working. He knew. He had known all along what my mother intended, and he had buried it. "Your Honor," Sterling stammered, trying to recover. "This video, its provenance is questionable. It could be a deepfake, technology these days." "Mr. Sterling," the judge interrupted, her voice icy. "I suggest you tread very carefully. Accusing the plaintiff of manufacturing a deepfake without evidence is a serious charge. This video appears to be time-stamped and witnessed. We request a recess to have our experts analyze the digital footprint," Sterling said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Granted," the judge said. "We reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m., but Mr. V, be advised, if this video is authenticated, perjury charges will be on the table." As we filed out of the courtroom, Andrew stopped me. His lawyers tried to pull him away, but he shook them off. "Adeline," he said, his voice wasn't angry anymore. It was hollow. "Why are you doing this? I'm your father." "You stopped being my father the night of the earthquake," I said, looking him in the eye. "When you looked at my son, your grandson, and told him he wasn't welcome because he might scratch your floors." I was stressed, he said, pleading now. Julia, she has requirements. I was trying to keep the peace. You chose her peace over my safety, I said. You chose a Gala over your family. You made your choice, Dad. Now you have to live with it. She'll leave me, he whispered, a flash of genuine fear in his eyes. If I lose the house, the money, Julia will leave. I looked at him, realizing for the first time how small he actually was. He wasn't a titan of industry. He was just a lonely, insecure man who had bought a life he couldn't afford with love he didn't deserve. Then she never loved you either, I said, just like you never loved us. I walked away. That night, Mark called me. We got the forensic report back on the metadata early. It's 100% authentic, and we found something else. What? The witness, Martha. We found her old journals in the box under the false bottom. Sarah found them. Martha wrote about the day of the signing. She wrote that Andrew came home early that day. He saw them in the library. He saw the papers. He knew, I said, my blood running cold. He didn't just ignore it. He knew for a fact it existed. It gets worse, Mark said. We subpoenaed his bank records. The day after your mother died, he transferred $2 million from her personal trust, the one meant for you, into an offshore account. He used that money to pay off the mortgage on the manor, so he could claim it was his investment. So he stole my inheritance to steal my house, I said. Exactly, and tomorrow we're going to prove it. The stakes had shifted. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about justice for my mother. It was about exposing a lifetime of deceit. Andrew wasn't just going to lose the manor. He was going to prison. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread. My father's attempt to dismiss the video as a deepfake had backfired spectacularly, drawing even more attention to the proceedings. Andrew sat at the defense table, looking smaller and grayer than I had ever seen him. Julia was notably absent. Sterling, Andrew's lawyer, looked like he hadn't slept. He knew they were fighting a losing battle, but he had one last desperate move. Your Honor, Sterling began, his voice shaky. We acknowledge the existence of the video. However, we contend that Mrs. Alina V. was under undue influence at the time. Her judgment was impaired by her illness and heavy medication. She was coerced by her friend, Martha S., who had a long-standing grudge against my client. A murmur went through the gallery, blaming a dead woman for manipulating another dead woman. It was low, even for them. Objection. Mark shot up. Speculation. Martha S. is not on trial here. Overruled, the judge said, leaning forward. Mr. Sterling, you are treading on thin ice. Do you have evidence of coercion? We have. Testimony, Sterling said, gesturing to the back of the room. From a former nurse who cared for Mrs. V. A woman I didn't recognize stood up. She looked nervous, clutching her purse. Please state your name for the record, the bailiff said. Karen Miller, she whispered. Sterling guided her through her testimony. Ms. Miller, did you ever witness Mrs. V seeming confused or easily led during her final months? Yes, Karen said, avoiding my gaze. Sometimes she would forget things. She would agree to anything just to make people stop talking. And did you see Martha S. frequently? Every day, Karen nodded. She was always whispering to her, telling her things about Mr. V. negative things. Thank you, Sterling said, looking smug. No further questions. Mark stood up slowly. He didn't approach the witness stand immediately. He walked to our table and picked up a single piece of paper. Ms. Miller, Mark said, his voice deceptively calm. You worked for the V family for 6 months in 2015, correct? Yes. And you were let go 2 weeks before Mrs. V passed away. I resigned, Karen stammered. Is that so? Mark held up the paper. Because I have here a termination letter signed by Andrew V. himself. It cites theft of prescription medication as the reason for your departure. The courtroom gasped. Karen's face turned bright red. That's a lie, she shrieked. He told me to say that. He told you to say what? Mark pressed, stepping closer. That you stole drugs or that you resigned. He told me if I testified today, he would clear my record. Karen blurted out, realizing too late what she had said. He said he would pay me. Pandemonium erupted. The judge slammed her gavel, but the noise was deafening. Andrew put his head in his hands. Sterling looked like he wanted to vanish into the floor. "Order!" the judge roared. "Ms. Miller, are you stating under oath that the defendant attempted to bribe you for false testimony?" "Yes," Karen sobbed. "I needed the money, I'm sorry." "Bailiff, take Ms. Miller into custody for perjury," the judge ordered, her face a mask of fury. She turned her gaze to Andrew. "Mr. V, stand up." Andrew stood, trembling. "This court has seen enough," the judge said, her voice echoing with finality. "The video evidence is authenticated. The amendment to the will is valid. The testimony against it has been proven to be perjured and sourced through bribery. I am issuing a summary judgment in favor of the plaintiff, Adeline V." She wasn't finished. Furthermore, due to the revelation of potential witness tampering and the financial irregularities uncovered in the trust accounts, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. Effective immediately, the defendant is evicted from the property known as the Highcrest Manor. You have 24 hours to vacate. The gavel came down like a thunderclap. I looked at Andrew. He was staring at me, his eyes wide with shock. He mouthed something, maybe please or I'm sorry, but I couldn't hear him over the cheering from the gallery. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Mark. "It's over, Adeline," he said, smiling. "You won." I looked across the aisle at the man who had been my father. He was alone. His lawyer was packing up his briefcase, avoiding eye contact. Julia was nowhere to be seen. The empire he had built on lies had crumbled in a single afternoon. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity, but of a different kind. This time, it was the good kind. We moved into the manor 3 days later. The first thing I did was hire a crew to remove every trace of Julia's renovations. The cold, modern art was replaced with warm, colorful paintings my mother had loved. The sterile white furniture was swapped for comfortable sofas and rugs. I opened the heavy curtains that had always been drawn, letting the sunlight flood in. Leo ran through the hallways, his laughter echoing off the walls that had once been so silent. He found the secret passage behind the library bookshelf, a feature my father had hated but my mother had adored, and turned it into his superhero headquarters. We found Andrew living in a small, furnished apartment downtown. Julia had left him the day the verdict came down, taking whatever jewelry and assets she could carry. He was facing multiple charges for fraud and embezzlement. His architectural firm had dissolved overnight as clients fled the scandal. I went to see him once, about a month after the trial. He looked frail, defeated. "Adeline," he said when he opened the door, surprised to see me. "I brought you some things," I said, handing him a box. It contained old photo albums, pictures of him and Mom before the money, before the greed, pictures of me as a baby. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "After everything I did." "Because Mom wouldn't want me to be cruel," I said, "and because I don't want to carry the hate anymore. It's too heavy." He took the box, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I lost my way." "You did," I said. "And you have to pay for that, but you're still my father. If you want to see Leo, once this is all over, maybe we can talk." I left him there, clutching the memories of a life he had thrown away. Back at the manor, life was blooming. Sarah moved in with us, helping me turn the vast estate into something meaningful. We started a nonprofit foundation in my mother's name, dedicated to helping single mothers and children in crisis, families who, like us, had lost everything in an instant. One afternoon, I sat on the back terrace, watching Leo and Sarah chasing fireflies in the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold. I held a glass of wine, my mother's favorite vintage, and looked out over the land that had been in my family for generations. It wasn't a fortress anymore. It wasn't a museum. It was a home. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. "Just got word. The DA accepted a plea deal, 5 years minimum, but he admitted to everything. It's really over." I put the phone down and took a sip of wine. A sense of peace, deep and abiding, settled over me. We had survived the earthquake. We had survived the betrayal. We had fought the giant and won. "Mommy, look!" Leo shouted, running up to me with a jar glowing with fireflies. I caught the light. I pulled him into my lap, kissing the top of his head. "You sure did, baby, you sure did."